Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. I am back with Brian Niemeyer for the Retrostream. So this is just where we talk about a lot of trends from the past. It goes all over the place. But Brian, I associate with him and JD Cowan both with the concept of cultural ground zero, which is basically that the culture kind of ran out of steam in 1997. And then from there, we're just kind of recycling and recomposting the stuff of the past in various different ways. I just saw a trailer on Twitter, I think, for a new Fallout TV show. And as to be expected, the sets looked really good and the writing was really, really, really terrible. It's like, who are they paying to write this? And I have some hypotheses on why that's the case. But anyway, hope you're doing great, Brian. Are you doing okay today?
Oh, doing a lot better now. Let's just say I've had to deal with a number of headaches, some of which stem from cultural ground zero and just regular ground zero. So it's always good to talk to you and your awesome viewers.
I think there's a lot of new stuff that's popped up since the late 60s for sure. Like heavy metal is new. Like there's a lot of new stuff, but 1997, you'll notice the really popular stuff. It's like you go into a mall and you hear songs from 2002, which would not. There's no way that would have been the case in 1997. You wouldn't have heard songs from 1975. It just wouldn't, like, that'd be unthinkable back then. there was this idea of things that were current, and we've kind of lost that along the way. But we also, Brian recently published a really good article on malls, and the mall has been something that I think we've lost it, and it's also one of these cultural touchstone things that we have lost. And through the process of losing it, we've really missed out on a lot of access to the way our culture used to work and used to operate. And people end up a little bit more bubbled in their own little bubbles, both socially and I think in terms of like the products that they're aware of. I don't know, the loss of the mall, it is a kind of a sad thing to me, but as people pointed out on Twitter, it was kind of an inevitability given the way that commerce has gone over the last 30 years. That malls would give way to a more efficient model, which in this case would be like e-commerce. And then you'd have to find ways, you either just lose the things that were attached to the mall or you have to find other ways to fill them in. We don't have arcades really anymore, unless you go to something like Dave & Buster's. I don't know, Chuck E. Cheese is the last idea of an arcade that's around. But we used to have these dungeon arcades in the mall, and specialty video stores where you would get weird stuff like anime, but now you can just watch anime online. It's not an issue to get any of that anymore. And you would meet your friends at the mall. You'd see your friends at the mall, and chances are if you went to the mall, you were going to run into other people that you knew because everyone was going to the mall on the weekend. It's something that's disappeared from our culture. So I was wondering if you would expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Oh, where to begin? What's really sticking out that I can say is, even though, okay, we grew up on alternate sides of the country pretty much. Like, you're on the West Coast, you were on the West Coast. I'm here on what's sometimes called like the North Coast on the Great Lakes in Illinois, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like 3 hours from Chicago, and everything that you write about the mall totally resonates with me. That's just perfect. Like, I remember how back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had an Aladdin's Castle arcade in our local mall, and they would open early. Like, the regular mall opened normal business hours, but on Saturdays, for a while there, they opened at 6 a.m. For like the Paperboy crowd who could come by, and they let the kids into just the arcade early, and you'd go there and you just hang out. You wouldn't necessarily spend a bunch of money. I mean, everybody carried around like a little pouch of tokens, right? And you just spend like hours hanging out with your friends until the main mall opened. Okay, then what would you do? Would you go home? No, you would like go to the Sam Goody or the Music Land, or you'd go to the comic book store, or you'd go to Babbage's or KB and check out the latest SNES or PS1 games.
Yeah, we didn't know what games were coming out until we went to the store.
Go to a movie, and it was like an all-day thing.
Yeah, we didn't know like what games or software were coming out till we went to the store and we're like, oh, that looks cool. Like, you would see it on the shelf. Think about how much like covers mattered back then. When you didn't, there weren't very many magazines in the early 90s for games. There was like Nintendo Power, which wasn't I mean, it did do promotions, but it wasn't entirely geared towards like promoting and talking about upcoming games to let people know that they were going to be around. It was more like secrets, it was like players' guides and stuff like that. So you mostly learned about new stuff by seeing it in the store, whether it was a new toy or a new game or a piece of software or a new piece of hardware. You saw it in the store, you physically saw it, and then you'd have to think about how you were going to get it. Same, not entirely with music. You heard about on the radio usually first, but you used to be able to listen to music before you bought it, and that went away in the 90s too, where you go and you're like, can I listen to this? And they'd be like, you get a weird look like, no, you can't listen to CDs before you buy them. Get out of here. We're not opening that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to go off on a whole other tangent here, but you bring up one aspect of growing up in Gen Y, or as one of my blog commenters led me to redub it the mall generation, which I think sets us apart. Or rather, the mall generation would be like kind of an overlap between Gen X and Y, but the idea of still being surprised by pop culture products, right? Like,
Yeah.
with the internet that these kids have these days, like it's impossible to avoid spoilers, and so you know everything about the new movie or the new game or the new album like months before it comes out.
Yeah. This is actually, I mean, to go on a kind of a weird tangent, this is one of the reasons that I think MMOs like World of Warcraft have been ruined for really a long time, well over 10 years at this point, is because like with World of Warcraft, they started a public like playtest realm. So everybody would get on the playtest realm and figure out the fights, and then the day that a new patch would be released with a new dungeon, it would get cleared within hours. And it wasn't like that when WoW came out. It would take months sometimes for a raid to get cleared because nobody knew how to do the fights. It was just like, here's a boss, and it would do stuff, and you'd have to figure out how to fight it. And there was a lot of fun with that, but it's all kind of evaporated. It's like day one, did you download the new deadly boss mods for the new boss? Go there, do what the mod tells you to do, and then we can clear this dungeon on day one and get our purple items. It's like, that's not nearly as fun as it used to be, where like it was really hard to finish those dungeons back in the day. It wasn't just a given that you'd be able to do it day one, that you didn't know what was going to happen until it was released.
So that element of discovery in a physical, it was like it kind of was like Christmas every day. You didn't necessarily know what you were going to get. And now everything is just served up to you on a silver platter. It's like, here you go.
If you look at the launch, if you look at the launch of the original NES, you can tell that it was meant for physical stores. It was a physical product for physical stores. That's what that robot was all about. Is because there had been this video game crash in the early 80s, and the way that Nintendo sold its units wasn't by advertising in magazines. It wasn't by there was no online advertising. It had to convince toy stores to put the Nintendo Entertainment System in the toy store. And in order to get them to convince them to do that, they needed that freaking robot. Who I think there were only like 2 games for the robot. I think it was Gyromite and Stack Up. And anyway, they had the robot out. So, of course, what you do is you'd go through the mall and you'd be at like KB Toys, or maybe Sears would have it. Because Sears used to have tons of toys and stuff back then too. And you would see this weird robot thing. Like, what is this toy? What is this new toy? And so that's what got people into buying the NES, was that they created a product for people to physically look at in the toy store. Not something that had, and you think about it, people had no concept of specs of computers, an 8-bit processor or whatever was going on with that was in the NES. None of that mattered. It didn't matter that it was an 8-bit computer. What mattered is that it had a toy robot and a gun that you shot at the TV. And so someone could pick up and hold the gun and like look at the robot and see the demo and buy the item back in like 1984 or 85, whenever it hit the States. It was built around that. And so now it would be weird for us to think in that same way with a modern console. Yeah, we have console display units, but not things that are meant for people to be like, oh, what is this thing?
Yeah, Daddy Warpig Dornall and I interviewed the author of this book called Console Wars years ago now. Did it ever tell you about that book?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it outlined exactly what you're talking about in even more detail, just about how it had suffered this Atari shovelware-driven crash in like 83, which never happened in Japan. And so when Nintendo sent over some guys to try to market the original Famicom, and I believe they started like in New York was their first test market for like the Christmas season of 85. They couldn't get arrested in a lot of the toy stores there because they're like, oh no, we don't want video games. Video games don't sell. And that's why they rebranded it as the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yeah, and they designed the
Nintendo
robot
video game system.
almost like the robot was made just for the U.S. market. Now, someone asked, like, never seen it. You could see some demos on YouTube of it. I had a friend who had the robot, and it was pretty cool, but there was only one game we could play on it, which was Gyromite, and there's just not much to Gyromite. It's like a Super Mario reskinned game where the robot presses controller buttons. Like, that's all it is. You know, it's the robot was a very clever design. Like, the Nintendo engineers were really clever with how they designed their accessories for Nintendo. Which, by the way, the NES is the first 3D system from Nintendo. A lot of people don't know this. Nintendo actually shipped a 3D accessory for the Famicom. I don't know if it ever came to the US, but they definitely had it in Japan. That had shutter glasses, just like what we would see way, way later. That would alternate every other eye at about 60 hertz. So every eye was getting about 30 frames per second, and then would alternate the frames on the TV to match. So you get this, stereoscopic 3D games on the NES. That was an actual thing that shipped back in the 80s. It wasn't new at all. So weird to think about that. Like, and the Sega had one too. Nintendo was not the only company that shipped that. Sega had 3D glasses for their Master System as well. And those 3D glasses, I've heard you can get them to work with the Genesis if you have like all the adapters and everything that go with it. But yeah, there was a 3D shutter glasses back in the 80s. Their engineers were very clever for ways to like figure out how to, like, can we make a robot that will just, like, I don't know, look at the TV and like maybe we can flash some things and then the robot will do something. So they just programmed the robot to respond to like 5 different commands maybe, and then built games that could use the robot responding to those couple commands that they could program really easily. It was really a pretty clever device.
You've got to respect not only Nintendo's innovation but determination, because if you look at the history of their peripherals, they keep trying the same concepts until they finally stick. So the first DS was the Game & Watch.
Yes. That's right. I had one. I had a Donkey Kong one. Oh, it's cool. I wish I still had it. Maybe I'll get it when I get back here.
And one that was the same design that flips open and has dual screens. Like, it looks exactly the same, except on an old style like LCD display. Like if you look at the orange one.
Yeah, the original LCD displays, like the Tiger games. If you guys ever remember the Tiger games, I just saw a super chat from Mike Browning. Always good to catch a stream. Are you checking out Dragon's Dogma 2? I haven't seen anything about it yet. I mean, I've seen a couple things about it, but I haven't really checked it out yet. Anyway, as you were saying, Brian,
we're recreating the Gen Y experience here. We're avoiding spoilers. Yeah, and then like the first motion control experiment was the Power Glove, which, yes, I know, it was a third-party peripheral, but they still okayed it.
Yeah, and it did work on like that one game. There was one game that it actually worked really well on. I had a friend who had the Power Glove, but we were all like, we saw the commercials. There was another one called the U-Zone, where you like waved your hand over this device to like put in inputs. That was another third-party one, and I don't know what happened to that one. But there was one game that worked with it where you could put a flight stick thing on it, and it would actually like fly the plane. So anyway, yeah, crazy peripherals. Now, I feel like the days of really crazy peripherals, I think, died with the Wii. I think that was like the last gen where we got like really crazy console peripherals, like. There was the Wii mode and the PlayStation Move, and Xbox had the whole Kinect thing going on. And they just sort of abandoned that. We're like, we're just going to make it a pretty straightforward PC experience from now on.
It's weird.
U-Force. Yes, thank you, Matthew. The U-Force.
Yeah, what goes around kind of comes around, because I remember back when the Wii was just about to launch, reading this article. Yeah, look, the Wii it's a cool idea, but it's yet another Nintendo novelty that's not ready yet. And he said it's going to end up like 70mm movies.
Oh yeah.
Like, are they technically superior? Yes, but did they catch on? No, and here's why not. And he went into the cost and just the difficulty of getting people out of like a preferred medium. Well, and then the Wii came out, it was a huge smash success. So like, well, that guy's eating crow, but you know what?
What?
He ended up being kind of like this fluke novelty.
Yeah. Well, here's what I noticed about the Wii is that the Wii sold a lot of systems to people who don't buy and play a lot of games. So
Right.
what the core audience was still mostly on Xbox 360 and PlayStation. Maybe there was still core audience on Wii. I wouldn't say that like Wii games were bad or anything, but if you look at sort of the catalog, it was always like there was this Wii catalog of kind of shovelware games and then Nintendo games and maybe third party games to try to get that install base. But I remember, I think Activision found that even if they shipped like a Call of Duty game to Wii and made it work, they just weren't going to sell many copies of it. So most of the mainstream stuff still ended up on the HD Twins. And we responded, I mean, not we, Nintendo responded with the Wii U, which was fully backward compatible with the Wii, but just did away with the motion controls. Like it just didn't continue with those. Instead, you had the tablet. I still think the Wii U might be the best console they've ever designed as far as what it could do and how easy it was to use. But, that was also one of their least successful consoles. So what do I know? I think people were not interested in another generation of Wii. They wanted something that could play more of the mainstream games that had been getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, nowadays, the joke, of course, is that if you want to find a Wii, like, look in your grandma's closet under all the dust.
Yeah,
But
you can get them cheap, and they still run a lot of retro games if you want to go that route. They did the whole virtual console stuff. So if you're willing to hack your Wii, you can install a lot of retro games on it, which is pretty cool. Super chat from Raul Nyanzi. True patricians use the Game Genie and the Game Shark. Funny, a lot of NESs now will not work without the Game Genie in them because of
really,
that weird push down thing. The contacts get worn out. So a lot of times if you have an NES that doesn't work, if you shove a Game Genie in there, all of a sudden it'll work again because the Game Genie like forces the pins open and then you can put a regular game in it.
oh wow, I'd heard that one.
Yeah, so sometimes you can resurrect your NES with a Game Genie. If it's truly broken, there's a guy who makes guitars out of him called the Gitindo guitar. I've never bought one. I always wanted one. They're not like super awesome guitars as far as just features go. It's a guitar neck bolted onto, he runs a block through the NES and then bolts a guitar neck onto it and puts a pickup on it, But it's a guitar that plays and it looks like a Nintendo, and that's cool.
Not good enough for punk rock.
Yeah.
And yeah, getting back to you in the chat talking about the Wii U. Man, that has got to be the most poorly served. Like the one console that got the rawest deal from the market, other than perhaps the Dreamcast. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think the Dreamcast was an arcade board. It was so good. It was so good for the time it came out. And it just didn't, I don't know what it was. I have to say it's like people bought Sony because Sony had already been so successful in that previous generation. It just sort of automatically, if you're going to pick one, I guess you pick the PS2. And also the PS2 played DVDs. I think that gets underrated, like how important it was to have a device that could do more than one thing in the year 2000. People didn't have DVD players, so if it could play DVDs as well, there you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. But there's another angle that everybody misses with the Dreamcast, and you hinted at it, which was the previous generation.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the sales numbers and Sega's internal comments from the time, at first, they were doing it. Like, it was selling like gangbusters out the gate. Flopped so hard in the West.
Yeah.
They had this huge deficit to overcome, and one day their bean counters just came into Sega of America CEO's office and was like, okay, yes, like you had the number one, like fastest selling console, and yeah, it's moving like this many tens of thousands of units a day. If you continue selling at this pace, we will go broke in like 9 months. Like, so yes, you can stick with the Dreamcast and you can keep trying to sell it, but you will run the company into the ground.
Yeah.
And like, credit to Sega, they actually had the meeting wherein the CEO presented this to everybody and was like, okay, like, here are our choices. Yeah, we've got a great console. Everybody believes in it. We love it. It is really selling well. It's going to bankrupt the company. Do we ride this bomb all the way to the ground?
Yeah. Or do we
And
pull out of it?
it was close, but they finally decided, yeah, we got to pull the plug and get out of the console business.
Yeah, and just focus on software. And they're still around as a software company, and they still put out a lot of good games. I mean, they publish like the Vanillaware games. So, I mean, I think the space is better with Sega still in it, at least as a software company. But I mean, the hardware is hard, right? And even now there's three different hardware platforms, three different hardware standards, let's say, and one of them always ends up kind of being the dominant one. Nintendo's been able to keep. I mean, Nintendo is the most successful one, mostly because the Switch just does what a lot of people want something to do, which is to be a portable game system. They really kind of fell back on what their best quality was making portable devices. But I've heard rumors about Microsoft getting out of the console business. They bought all these game companies. And I think they kind of realized that there's probably more money and profit in publishing all the games themselves rather than in trying to make licensing money off the back end and selling hardware, especially at a loss. A lot of times you sell hardware you sell the hardware at a loss, at least initially,
Yeah,
just to
almost
get your
always.
install base there. Going back to the mall, somebody mentioned something that was really good that I didn't address, which was that if malls had these anchor stores like Sears or Macy's, these big department stores that were always on the corners, like you'd arrange a mall and then it was like on these ends were these big stores. If you lost one of those, like your mall was almost done for, because the mall was always built around people being there for another reason and then going to other stores. They were there at Macy's to like buy clothes, and then they'd go down to Babbage's or whatever and see what kind of toys were out there. I just thought that was a really good point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, like how malls then, under that conception, were kind of like an inverse McDonald's, right? Is what's McDonald's business model? It, like, at least through the 80s and 90s, it was aiming their advertising at kids. That's why they had the Happy Meals and the play places and the colorful cartoon characters. And like, really the only reason they kept stuff like the Big Mac and, like, for a while the McDLT on the menu
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, you're a dad, you brought your gang of kids to McDonald's on a Saturday because they saw the commercials during Saturday morning cartoons. They bugged you until you broke down and took them there. And you're like, well, I'm here, might as well get something. That
Yeah.
was always the secondary market.
Yeah, and that was huge. That's what made the mall exist, and why you were willing to pay a lot of money for rent in a mall is that if you sold specialty stuff, you really needed people to come by and like do that impulse buy. They needed to already be there. You had to rely on that foot traffic. You were basically renting the foot traffic as well as the space for your store to exist. So as soon as you start losing a little bit of that foot traffic, the mall's done for. You know.
Yeah. So, personal anecdote about that, we talked about a bit before the show. So, a couple years back, our local mall changed hands. And one day, I happened to be walking out of there and saw this dude with like a tripod and what looked like a spyglass taking measurements in the parking lot. So, like, oh, I wonder what's going on here. I walked up to him, and it turned out he was a surveyor hired by like a third party company, and his whole job for the last several years had been traveling the country to malls that were shutting down or being sold and doing surveying. And he told me that, yeah, the problem with you guys' local mall here is the management never got their heads out of the 1980s. Like, not only do they charge for rent, but they charged like 10 to 20% of each store's monthly profits. They made every store chip in for HVAC costs and for parking lot cleaning.
Oh yeah.
And you just can't do that anymore.
Hmm. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I read this book on malls back in the early 2000s, and it was kind of fascinating because by then malls weren't dying yet. But there was a whole strategy for how you built a mall. Is that before you even built the mall, you would basically get stores lined up to be in it, and you wanted two anchors. There was different. The bigger the mall, the more anchors, right? So a really big mall would have four anchors, and like Mall of America has like six anchors in it. Right, but a standard mall will have two, like maybe J.C. Penney on one side and like Macy's on the other, or Sears on one side and and whatever department store, Montgomery Ward or something on the other side. And then you build the mall kind of in between those, and if you have a three one, then you have kind of a three-sided mall. And then from there, you kind of decide how much foot traffic you're going to have. You could have a two-level mall, and then you divide it all up from there. And then when they open the mall, this is an interesting thing I found out, is that they paint all of the parking stalls really wide so that it looks like there's a lot of people at the mall. Then once the mall is established and there's lots of businesses there, they go back and they paint over the parking lot, make it black. They repave the parking lot. And then they make all the parking spots really narrow so that people don't feel like the mall is so busy they can't go there. You want to feel like there's people there because it's a social event. The whole point of the mall is that people are at the mall. And when you see other people at a store, it's a piece of social proof. So you're kind of artificially inflating the social proof when you open the mall by showing lots of cars there. Like, oh, obviously these businesses are good or there wouldn't be so many people here. And then as it fills up, you don't want people to be turned away by like, it's too busy for me to go. So you start to shrink those. And I knew that malls were getting in bad because I saw them doing the opposite of it in the early 2000s. So I remember which mall it was. I want to say it was like Fashion Fair Mall in Fresno, this big mall. They repaved the parking lot and repainted it with big parking spots so it looked like people were there. People weren't going there anymore. And it had become like a gang hangout. And it's funny, Fresno had one of the early pedestrian malls from the 1960s called Fulton Mall. And Fulton Mall, as long as I could remember when I lived there, was always in trouble. They built an entire baseball stadium right next to the mall to try to get more foot traffic in through that mall. And what happened was there's foot traffic walking through the mall to the baseball stadium, then they immediately leave because as soon as the sun sets, Fulton Mall is full of gangs and you'll get shot or robbed. It just became a completely awful place, but it had these beautiful designs from the 1960s, that kind of mid-century modern design for fountains and stuff. It was a really beautiful mall when it opened. But once you start going down that slide, how do you recover it? They built an entire baseball stadium to try to bring that mall back, and it didn't work. And I know that from like having played a couple gigs there, they tended to just fill it up with, there was like a lot of art galleries there trying to do specialist kind of stuff with art. But you didn't want to be there after dark because it would fill up with gangs. I don't know why. They just showed up at the mall. Maybe that's when they woke up. And like every store was like a discount like clothes seller. Sold like FUBU stuff and like random t-shirts and blankets and stuff. It was really bad.
Yeah, we were a free anchor store mall, and they're basically down to one now. Just the Pennies is left. But back during the Trump years, which, gosh, it's hard to believe is quite a while ago now, there's a chain of Japanese arcades and like bowling alleys, just like family fun centers.
Yeah.
And my dad is an ex-cop, so he's still got his finger on the pulse of what's going on. And he said the local cops had alerted him that, yeah, you might want to beware of them all because like the local gangs have declared a turf war over who gets the rights to control the drug trade at the new arcade. And so going in there, the round one had to hire local private security to keep the bangers under control. And like even still, when I'd go in there, like you'd see a sketchy looking dude in a tracksuit court right outside the arcade entrance and like check a cheap flip phone every once in a while and just like generally look really nervous and on alert. And like sure enough, it turned out they were like the lowest earning round one in the whole global franchise. And then Corona Chan finished him off, and that was that.
Yeah.
So we can't have nice things.
Yeah, so in my experience, the big mall die-off happened around 2007 to 2008. When there's an economic downturn, people change their consumer spending habits. And so if you're already a little bit threatened by e-commerce, like e-commerce hadn't really crested until the late 2000s. And that coincided pretty much perfectly with people think of it as the housing crash, and the housing crash is part of it, but it was a major economic downturn. At the time, I was a performer in Central California, and every venue that I performed at closed within 6 months. Every venue that I had worked at and made money at closed. So all of my regular economic opportunities disappeared within 6 months of Barack Obama being elected. But it started before that, right? It started at the end of the Bush years. But that's what I remember. It's like, and all the malls closed. Because they're operating on such a thin profitability margin that if there's a little bit of a downturn, if there's a full recession, like 3/4 of negative economic growth, they're done for. In the 80s, they would be fine because people still would go to the mall because they would still need clothes, but people had too many other options in 2008. I would say two out of every 3 malls that I could think of actually closed, including really nice malls. Malls that were like the example of what a good mall was supposed to be. They just, I remember East Hills Mall in Bakersfield. First, they closed half the mall. They tried that. They're like, this half of the mall was closed. And then they just had to close the rest of it. I think the buildings are still there. I don't know if they ever knocked them down.
Yeah, that's sad. And you're right. The real mall Ground Zero seems to coincide with gaming Ground Zero around 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
But even like cultural Ground Zero as a whole, really just the end result of a series of cascading missteps or events that are out of people's hands. So like with the malls, I know you pointed to e-commerce in your tweets, but in the research I did, fledgling e-commerce like QVC and the Home Shopping Network and just paper catalogs and people ordering merchandise over the phone started to cut into malls' profits in the 80s.
Yeah,
and then
that's a good point.
Big box stores like Best Buy started cutting into the anchor stores. Like that's what really poached the anchor stores away in the late 90s.
So there was a kind of a newer style mall that opened up in Fresno that killed off other malls, of course. But it was an outdoor mall kind of basically in the format of Fulton Mall, one of these 1960s, not an indoor mall, but an outdoor pedestrian mall. And rather than having department stores as anchors, they had this really big movie theater. It was an Edwards 21 movie theater. The Edwards company went broke because every theater was losing money, except that one, which had kept the entire company afloat for multiple years because it was so profitable. They put a giant 21 plex there, and then there were no other real anchor stores there other than like a Borders Booksellers, which at that point was really a coffee shop. And the rest of it was just little shops. But people would, because back in the 90s and 2000s, you had to go buy a ticket, and then you had to wait around for the movie to open up so you could find a seat. And then afterwards, you would hang out with your friends. So there was like foot traffic there. And then there was a Best Buy kind of near there. You would have to maybe drive to get to the Best Buy because it was like in the next little area over. But there were all the bigger stores kind of in another strip mall kind of by it. So people would be like, oh, well, we can go by the big box stores and go by the movie theater, and then they would end up going by the little stores as well. And it was a whole thing, but it got killed by, I think it got killed by Corona Chan as well. They closed down, once they closed the movie theater and they closed Borders went out of business. There's no reason for anyone to go there.
We are through the looking glass, because guess what happened in my Midwestern town?
Yeah.
The exact same thing.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious. Down to the last detail. Because, yeah, we had like we had a mall built in 1974, classic indoor style with 3 anchors. Well, then, a few miles down the interstate, this local property developer built an outdoor mall. Okay, outdoor in Illinois, where we can get multiple feet of snow.
Yeah.
And the one anchor was a movie theater, and the other was a Borders. And there was a Best Buy down the road.
Yep. Yeah, the Best Buy was really close. There was a Target, so like we'd go to Best Buy and.
Yes.
But Borders, I would try to buy things at Borders because Borders like had more selection at the time of pretty much everything. They built a Forever 21 there as well. Eventually, like they built more stores connected to it because people wanted to go there. They even built like an outdoorsy store there at one point, like not a Bass Pro Shop, but like something like that, like a Dick's. Stores would add on to try to get that foot traffic. But Borders is a good example. It's like Barnes and Noble and Borders both sort of pursued the same strategy after 1997, which was rather than selling books, they were going to sell knickknacks and coffee, and try to get people to be in the store and then maybe buy other high profit margin things, because people weren't really buying books that much. Like it was just, even though there's, the total book sales go up and down, the online book sales start to really take over in the early 2000s, not just indies, but regular books. People would be like, well, I want to buy the new Stephen King book. Turns out there's a website called Amazon that'll sell it to me, and I don't have to go anywhere to get it, But Borders would order things for you. I remember having to special order different things. They would order music for you from really weird places. I think I got Dragon Force from Borders because it didn't exist in the United States. Back then, you couldn't, back then, music imports worked differently. Now everything just ships everywhere. But if you didn't have someone making the CD in Europe, then your CD wasn't for sale in Europe. No one could buy it. It's kind of weird, but that's how it was.
Yeah. Yeah, back in 2005, I worked for Borders Group briefly at a Walden Books. And this gets into the consolidation that, our friend in chat, author J.D. Cowan, has talked about. So, yeah, at our mall, originally, we had both a Walden Books and a B. Dalton. Got bought up by some bigger company, and they closed that location, so it was just a Walden Books. Then Borders Group bought Walden Books. Because, like you said, they stopped selling books and started selling knickknacks, and mainly, the main thing was their in-store gift cards. Like, I remember this book blogger's article complaining about how mom-and-pop stores couldn't compete with, Borders and Barnes & Noble on the price of the then most recent Harry Potter book. I think this was back during Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of dates it. Yeah. But they were just talking about how we can't compete with them price-wise because these companies can basically print their own money. They can sell their own script, and it's free money for them, so they can mark down the prices of their books.
Yeah.
But then eventually that came back. Well, really, Amazon came back to bite Borders, and they went under. And then similarly, I mentioned we'd had a Sam Goody and a Music Land and a Babbage's. Well, Best Buy bought out at least 2 of those companies and Suncoast, which we also had and you've mentioned. And now, as the folks on my blog notice, Best Buy doesn't even carry physical DVDs, Blu-rays, or CDs anymore.
The only physical media they carry are video games.
Yeah.
And half the video games now you buy, somebody pointed this out, they're like, I bought this collector's edition of the game, and it was a case with a download code. You open it up and like a piece of paper falls out. This is put this number in, and you'll get this. You'll get your software. So why do I have a case to put it on your shelf? What? What are we at here?
Wow.
You know, this was a thing too. Microsoft and Sony both. I get the sense that they're trying to figure out why people are like this, but you know, there's a digital PS5 and a PS5 with a Blu-ray drive, and no one wants the digital. No one wants to buy. Why? Even if they buy all their digital games, like they want the option to be able to put it to like buy a game or give a game to a friend and play it. As far as I know, Microsoft just never offered the Series X without a drive in it. I could be wrong, but they kind of had their nose to it the other way. It's like it's like people don't want to buy digital consoles. They're not ready to feel like they shouldn't have the option to have a physical game. Sorry.
Yeah, I see chat saying that in Japan they still haven't abandoned physical media. It's like the future and the past all at once. And it says Mickey Machina. And yeah, I had someone else on Twitter point that out, that malls are still big in Japan.
Yeah.
Like they still prefer the in-person retail experience. I didn't know that.
I mean, I would still prefer it, but I think Japan has a fairly homogenous culture, and we don't. So I have to be careful. Now, we have a great mall that we go to here in the Woodlands, north of Houston. It's great. You know, it's a good mall as far as malls go. It still has the mall experience, but it's not as nice as it was in, say, the 1980s. You know, it's just not. Another weird thing about Japan, because when I was looking into making visual novels, which I'm still looking into doing, but I have to get some of these books off my plate. You know, I've got too many books to publish. Yeah. Anyway, you know, people would go, there was all kinds of small stores dedicated to like specialty media that had just racks and racks and racks of PlayStation Vita games, all of them visual novels. Because the format's really big in Japan. The people still were buying PlayStation Vitas and using them. They're still doing it today in 2024. The console's 12 years old at this point. So people will go in, find a visual novel they want, pull it off the shelf, buy it, put it, that physical cartridge into their PlayStation Vita and read through and play the visual novel, you know. That experience is so foreign to the U.S. market. If you were to describe that, people are like, they're like shopping for it like it's like they're buying Mango or a book. It's like, yeah, but it's a visual novel, and then they put it into their console. People here barely even buy. They're like, well, why would I need a console? I have a phone which plays games, right? It's like, no, not the same. It's not the same. They still like their handheld consoles. George says my PSP still works. Hell yeah. My Nintendo DS still works. The battery's still good on it. It has an internal battery. And then my Game Boys from the whenever, they still work.
My SP's hinge broke. I need to get on that.
Yeah, so I had my hinge break on my Game Boy DS, and I actually just fixed it with super glue. I just super glued the parts back together. I'm like, it's already broken. If it gets on the board, it got on the board a little bit, didn't alter the function of the board at all, and so then the hinge was fixed. So that
is Nintendo tough. Yeah, I'm considering it.
Yeah,
I can't find a new shell.
Yeah, what I want to get is some more. If I could get Game Boy Advance SPs cheap, I would actually buy a couple of them just so that my son and I could play like Crystal Chronicles again. That was a really the 2000s gaming up through the 2000s. Really, gaming gave you a lot of really unique experiences. Console gaming did, and PC gaming as well. But now it feels like everything is sort of just either a single player experience or it's like a log into a server experience, and there's very little other variety. Maybe the VR stuff is the weird peripheral of the modern systems. A lot of people are not interested in VR headsets and VR gameplay. You know, the equivalent of the light gun today is probably playing like Doom VR with the like little PlayStation gun or whatever. Um, so, but yeah, we used to be able to get a GameCube, and you could bring your Game Boy Advance and a Game Boy Advance link cable over, and you all had your own little screen to like issue your commands for like your guys on the Final Fantasy screen. It was so fun. What a unique experience. Nothing like that today. You know, they come out with it again, and it's like you have these giant screens. You could put those individual screens in the corners. They're like, nah, we're just going to make it online and make it garbage instead of a unique, fun living room experience.
Well, that's Nintendo for you again, right? In the aughts, like, hey, let's have our consoles. Let's have our portable consoles connect to like our main console. Do something crazy.
Yeah. Now I found this out. So the 3DS can actually connect to the Wii U, but there's almost no games who use that functionality. I found one that does. It's Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, and I have it. If you have Monster Hunter... Huh? Sorry, what?
You're about to say. Sorry.
Yeah, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate is what it is. So if you have it, you can connect your 3DS, and you can play 2-player co-op on your couch with your 3DS and your Wii U. Weird. It's like they create functionality and don't use it. The Wii U can actually play GameCube games, but not on disc. It can only play the images. They didn't put a drive in it that could read mini DVDs, so it just can't read GameCube games. But if that drive were there, then it would have been backward compatible with 3 generations of system. Crazy. Or, yeah, something like that.
Oh, you're tickling my fancy there, sir, because I love little secret unpublished gaming Easter egg lore like that.
If you want another one with the PS Vita, the PS Vita could have been your Nintendo Switch. PlayStation could have come out with basically the equivalent of the Nintendo Switch in 2012. It has built into it the ability to output video, but they never enabled it. They never enabled it in the operating system. They built it all in case they were going to make a dock in the future. But they just never came out with that. Instead, they came out with the PS TV, which was a PS Vita that hooked up to your TV. It was instead of having it was a PS Vita that you connected to your TV, and it played PS Vita games.
Yes, my friend has one and he loves it.
They're really cool, and they're super hackable. So one of the first things I did when I was like, I'm going to hack this Vita, was I found out that you could hook it up via video. So if anybody remembers me playing through, let me think of most of the Final Fantasy games I played through on the channel, the classic ones, I played on my PS Vita, outputting video to my PC. Again, a feature, Sony's like, we don't want to enable people to connect it to the TV because then they won't buy the PS4. And I can't argue with that logic totally, right? It's like you want people to buy into your more expensive console, but like you could have just possibly nuked Nintendo by having a really, really good Sega Nomad in 2012. The Sega Nomad could do the same thing, by the way. It could hook up to your TV. Pretty cool.
Oh, wow. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
I was just aware that you needed like a boat battery.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. It ate batteries like nobody's business. We always wanted the Nomad. I knew a guy who had a Sega Nomad. It was very cool, but like I think it used 8 or 10 AA batteries, and they lasted like 30 minutes. So you could play 30 minutes of Sonic the Hedgehog in the car. But yeah, it was cool. It was a cool idea.
Back then, you could finish it like 9 times.
Oh, that's true. Once you got good at doing Sonic the Hedgehog, you could get through it really, really fast. At least Sonic 2. Sonic 2 was a really fast playthrough if you knew what you were doing. Sonic 3 as well. Yeah, thinking of weird things like, remember that Sonic 3 was so big they split it into two games that you could like connect to each other. So you could put your Sonic 3 into your Sonic and Knuckles, and then into your Game Genie, and then into your Sega, or then into your 32X, then into your Sega with the Sega CD attached.
And how they originally contracted Michael Jackson to do the soundtrack, but then the scandal hit. But
yes,
none of his songs is still in there.
Yeah.
And it became the basis for Stranger in Moscow.
Yeah, I think Hardwick asked what happened to Atari. So and JD Cowan answered that like the current Atari is actually a skin suit of the original Atari. Like it was Atari got bought and sold, and then the company that had bought Atari renamed itself Atari, I guess. So it's not the same company. Atari suffered because of the video game crash in the early 1980s and never really recovered their business as a result of that. What happened was you have to remember that there was no way to quality check games in the 1980s. There was no real social proof that was invented yet. There were magazines, but you just had no way to know what kind of game you were going to get for the Atari. So the Atari 2600 ended up with just piles and piles and piles of games that were shovelware or garbage games. And the companies that made them shoveled them out knowing people are going to randomly buy this game and it doesn't really matter how good it is. So that's what they did. They just shoveled the games out the door. I think there was an E.T. Atari game, which was horrendous. They made 1 million copies of it that no one bought, and they had to end up burying them in the desert outside of Las Vegas or somewhere.
That's half true. The ET cement covered landfill is true. They did find it. However, it's not a bad game. I've played it. It's okay.
It's okay.
I had to watch a game.
I watched a guide on how to play it, and I was like, "Oh, that's how you play it." Back then, guys, games you couldn't figure out how to play them unless you had the manual. It wasn't apparent from turning on the game most of the time. Any kind of complex game for the Atari, you needed a manual. Unless it was like Space Invaders, where it's like, oh, I press this button and I shoot. Easy, right? But yeah, anyway, there was a big crash. Atari never really recovered from that. Nintendo, meanwhile, had the semblance of quality with their like Nintendo seal of quality, which just meant that it wasn't really going to make your NES explode. It wasn't really a good seal of quality, in my opinion. But it slowly restored enough consumer confidence in video games that they were willing to buy them. Plus, we started to get more social proof of them, like magazines that might review them, and more people with word of mouth that could play them. You could rent. I don't remember if you could ever rent Atari games, but you could rent Nintendo games. And so that was a big one. So you could rent the game from the Video City or wherever, and then decide to buy it later if you wanted to. And that helped the industry recover. Atari came out with what was the next one that came out? The 5600? Or was it the 7200?
Yeah.
The 5600?
Got a 7200 for Christmas. Yeah, so they just add 2600, so there's the 2600, then
the 2600,
which was actually more powerful than the NES.
The 5200, and then the 70. I don't remember what it was.
78.
The 7800, yeah. The 7800 was backwards compatible with the 2600. The 5200 wasn't. And one of them,
right, yeah, its games are really wide. Like they're almost Sega Genesis wide.
Yeah, I remember wide games, and I remember this controller that was long and had like 9 buttons and then a joystick. And these controllers would just break all the time. They were really bad controllers. Compared to the original, one button joystick guy, it was really bad. So while the 70...
fun fact...
Yeah.
Really quick. Fun fact for Atari 2600 and 7800 owners at home. You can plug a Sega Genesis controller into the controller ports of the 2600 or the 7800, and it will work on all 2600 games to my knowledge, and like half of 7800s. Or I think it only works on 2,600 games played in the 7800, you will have some problems playing 7,800 games with it, but you can get an adapter, and it's way better.
Yeah. Anyway, the that's a really interesting idea. I guess it uses the same pin structure that that
Yep.
serial port. I've seen computers used to have that serial port too, so you could actually plug a Genesis controller into your PC and use it for some things. It was called like the joystick port or something like that. But yeah, the 50 whatever the 5600 whatever it was, it was that was like a real stinker. So that really hurt them again. Is to design and come out with a whole hardware platform that just didn't take off. By the time the 7800 came out, the NES and the Sega were already on the scene, and it was really too late. The last console that I think they made was the Jaguar. I had a friend who had the Jaguar. I don't know if you ever played on the Atari Jaguar.
Didn't get the chance.
So there was a Jaguar and a Jaguar CD, I think. I think they did. I think they did one of those things where they're like they had the CD version as well as the regular Jaguar version. So the Jaguar was really bad, and there were multiple problems with the Jaguar. It didn't have a good controller. They rushed it. They labeled it as 64-bit, but it ran really poorly, especially compared to what came right after it, which was the PlayStation 1. You know, the Jaguar was a really interesting piece of hardware that just it wasn't timed right, and that killed the company as far as like a game company. They still made Amiga computers. No, that was Commodore. Commodore was the one who made the Amiga computers. Right. What did Atari made another kind of computer, but they didn't emphasize that. They didn't try to get into like a competitive PC maker space. So
Yeah, I
once
think it's called the ST and the XE.
yeah, that's right. So once they kind of failed in the console market, there was nowhere else for them to go.
Because, yeah, and a weird thing about that, like one reason the 5200 was so weird is in '84, they brought on a new CEO named Jack Tramiel, who had previously worked with Commodore, and because they're dead, we're going to turn Atari into a computer company, and the 5200 kind of reflects that shift. They kind of changed horses in midstream, and like the 7800 was already in development, and it was originally intended to be like the NES killer. And they really succeeded hardware-wise. Like, for example, it's more powerful than the original Nintendo. It can handle way more sprites and images on the screen without slowdown. And I'm pretty sure process more color, so I'll have to look into that. But shelved. And so it was really ready to go in like '85.
But they waited too long to put it out.
Bingo.
Yeah. Yeah, someone mentioned that Atari put out those Tengen games. If you remember the Tengen black NES cartridges, they were basically sold outside of Nintendo's ecosystem. That's why they look different, so that they didn't violate any Nintendo patents, supposedly. I have one. I have the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom for the NES. It's a game I have never beaten, I don't think. I may have beaten it one time with like an online game and the Game Genie, trying to make it work. That game is hard as nails, and it's very difficult to figure out where you need to go. It's just a really tough game. But I remember it with those black cartridges. They had a Pac-Man. They had a black cartridge Pac-Man that was out there too. That was kind of a weird move. Was like, well, we'll just make NES games, but we won't pay them the licensing fee, and we'll keep all the money ourselves. Kind of an interesting move.
Yeah. It was a few companies tried ways of getting around Nintendo's seal of quality, which involved like proprietary lockouts and stuff. And yeah, I think Tengen was the result of some engineers just like buying a Nintendo and some Nintendo cards and just figuring out how to reverse engineer like Nintendo's proprietary encryption or whatever form of copy protection they had. And then, yeah, they redesigned the carts so as not to violate copyright because, get this, guys, if you were a video game developer who wanted to make games for Nintendo in the 80s, you had to purchase the carts from Nintendo.
Yep.
And
They
they
had to
charged
make
you
them.
for it.
Yeah, they made
So
them.
that they're, yeah. So, like, and you were limited to, like, I think 4 a year or something. And so a lot of companies, like, Acclaim spun off from, I believe, Konami, and you had like all these subsidiaries for them to get around like Nintendo's restrictions.
Yeah, so they could make more than 4 games a year per company. There was a lot of those. Hudson Soft was one. Yeah, Acclaim. There's another one. I think LPJ was one. Ultra Games.
And
Yeah,
Hudson Soft
Ultra
is
Games.
NEC. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a bunch of those. Now, another funny thing is there was actually a Christian game. I don't know if you guys remember Bible games. I think Angry Nintendo Nerd or Angry Video Game Nerd did a Bible game special. But they, it
We have
was one
Ultra
of the,
Games. Yeah, go ahead.
they reskinned other people's games. They like ripped them and then like put in different sprites in the resource forks or whatever they did, and they would reskin other people's games. And the way that those worked is that they looked like kind of like a Game Genie. So they were a cart like this, and then you had a lock on. You had to put a licensed Nintendo game into it. Then it would run the boot with that licensed Nintendo game, and then the unlicensed game would sort of take over, and you could play the unlicensed game, the unsigned game on your NES. And it was a Christian game that did that, right? It's like Bible Games, Bible Blaster, by Billy Graham or whatever it was. I don't remember what it's called, but it had a lock-on cart to get around the copy protection. Was it Noah's Ark?
Okay.
Noah's Ark 3D. So yeah, that's what they did.
Cowan and chat corrected me. It was Ultra Games. I was thinking of. Acclaim kind of has its roots in Activision spin-off subsidiary. So
Yeah.
thanks.
They do a lot of those. So it was a really interesting time. And like I said, I really remember a lot of the different peripherals. So NES had a plethora of them. Collecting all of them would be an interesting endeavor, especially to get the 3D glasses. So you could get a 3D setup for Nintendo, the light gun. There was a light gun for Sega and 3D glasses for the Sega Master System as well. A lot of people don't know that your Sega Genesis is fully compatible with Sega Master System, and technically can play Game Gear games as well. But you would need a modern adapter to play the Game Gear games because there was one little thing different about them, one pin different. I don't remember what it was. But if you could get the adapter, you can play Sega Master System. Sega made an adapter for it, and you can play Game Gear games on your Sega Genesis. How cool is that?
That is super cool. It's a little cooler than
So yeah, then there was the Power Glove
game.
What was the one we talked about earlier? The U zone or the U control, whatever it was. The one where you waved your hands. It had all these different peripherals. The SNES, by comparison, I have, as far as I know, the only two weird peripherals made for the SNES, which is the Super Scope and the mouse. So there's a mouse for the SNES that was used on Mario Paint. It came with Mario Paint. And I still have the mouse. I even have an adapter that you can hook. I could hook the mouse up to the PC and use it as a PC mouse now. It works. I don't know how, but it works. Then
That's almost as cool as the Master System and Genesis coming with preloaded games that will let you play if you turn them on and don't even have a card in there. I forget which ones they are. Do you remember?
I didn't know about this.
Yeah, they come, like, certain model numbers of them came with games that would work if you just didn't put anything in but just hit power.
Wow.
It would just load a game that just came on the motherboard or something. It's pretty cool.
Oh, I didn't know about that. That's a new one. I know that the Master System had carts and the game cards. So if you had adapters, you could actually play all of those with the Sega Genesis. Really interesting. There was the Super Game Boy adapter for the Super Nintendo. I remember that as well, and that worked great. Then there was a Game Boy Advance adapter for the GameCube, and that one worked really well as well.
Oh, wow, I didn't know about that. But yeah, I've got my Super Game Boy with Tetris loaded into it in my SNES, like a foot from where I'm talking to you. So I
Yeah.
can vouch for that.
Yeah, Tetris DX. That was the thing. I remember when Game Boy Color came out, I'm like, why would I get a Game Boy Color? And someone's like, I have Tetris DX for it. I'm like, oh, it's just Tetris with colors. And then I played it. I'm like, well, this is way better. Like it ran so much faster than the original Tetris. I'm like, oh, I gotta get this.
Hey, speaking of which, how could you ever like your name off Tengen games? Tengen Tetris is widely considered the best version for Nintendo. Period.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I believe they cracked it first,
Hmm.
and I think it has features that the official NES release doesn't have. And I think that was the one that they got sued over finally. That was the bridge too far.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Mario Paint
Anyway,
was good.
so
It was my first Mario Paint was my first score writer. Back when Finale
oh,
1. Finale 1.0. So people who don't I don't know if anyone's into music, like getting score writer programs back in the day was they didn't exist. There was one. It was called Finale. Finale 1.0, Finale 1 came on a single floppy and could make scores on it. And you could print them out and stuff. It was really cool. And that single floppy was like $800.
whoa.
Like, what? It was so expensive. It was ridiculous.
Well, I guess we don't have it too horrible nowadays with inflation.
Now, I don't remember really any of those weird peripherals for like the PS1. I think there was a mouse for the PS1. I could be wrong, but I didn't play any games that used the PS1 mouse. I don't remember any PS1 accessories, and I don't remember any special N64 accessories other than the like RAM expansion that they put in there for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, Sony's a whole other kettle of fish because yeah, they played it pretty straight with the PS1, and then the PS2 was when corporate took notice and they decided to go into their like, Trojan horse mode. And okay, we'll use the PS2 as the centerpiece of this all-encompassing home entertainment setup that will totally surround the customer with our products. And it
Yeah.
didn't really work.
Yeah, it didn't really work. I'm trying to remember the PS2 was a really, really amazing console when you think about it for the time. It had it had modem support. It didn't come with it, right? Like they wanted you to buy all these other things. The weirdest thing, the craziest thing, and I still kind of like gog. I'm like I can't believe they did this. Was Final Fantasy 11 online for the PlayStation 2. I don't know if anybody remembers this game or remembers the launch or how crazy people were about it and how flabbergasted people were bought the game and didn't realize it was an MMO because they never played Ultima or EverQuest. But it came as a hard drive. So there's that big port in the back of you. If you have an original PS2 FAT, there's this big empty space in the back for like a modem. But it was a hard drive that plugged into it and it had the modem. And so the game came loaded on the hard drive. It was like a 40 gigabyte hard drive or something like that, that the Final Fantasy 11 Online came loaded in. So when you bought it, it came in this big box with a hard drive in it. And you put the hard drive into your PS2 and then connected the phone lines up to the internet or whatever you were going to do with it. And that's how you played. That's how most of the people I know who played Final Fantasy 11 online played it on the PlayStation 2. And for the year 2001 or whenever it came out, it was really wild. It was really weird that they came out with it. And that it worked.
It was the PS2 was a revelation. I would mark that as the flashpoint of modern gaming. It still had enough DNA. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
It'd be like what came before it. Like, oh, you got a PS2, you can sit down there and like throw in a platformer or a JRPG, and online gaming really came into its own. And yes, I know that the Dreamcast had a modem, and you could play like Phantasy Star Online. Yeah, that's great. But yeah, like you were saying, the PS2 was where Final Fantasy 11 took off. and stuff like SOCOM.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's really we saw this blending of PC and console culture really started blurring the line.
Yeah, I think the line was blurred. I think the release of the PS3 is interesting because it was still the PS3 launched, and so did the Xbox 360. They launched as physical consoles, but they ended their run really as digital consoles, like online consoles.
Yes.
Things had changed really quite a bit by the time 2013 or whenever rolled around. The PS3, I knew people who bought it. I didn't buy it at launch. They bought it, and they bought physical games, and they never. Then they were like, "Whoa! I can like download these demos to my PS3, and they just will like download them to the hard drive, and we can just play them." And I could buy games and not have to go to the store. And there was like all kinds of weird little indie games that they could buy for the PS3 even then. And the Wii had that as well. The Wii shipped as a physical console and was highly digital. You could buy. We got it down like, what? You can just like, we could just buy. I'm trying to remember what game. Shining Force. We just like buy Shining Force for this right now. Do you want to play Shining Force right now? Yeah, let's buy it. It's $5. Let's play Shining Force. That was really cool at the time.
Got it. You got it, I think. The PS2 and the Dreamcast were kind of like the gateway drugs to online gaming that acclimated gamers. And then, it was the PS3, it was the 360 that really brought these digital experiences into the mainstream.
Yep.
Really started phasing out physical media.
Yeah, Record Deepness says like first exposure to the digital side of Netflix was on the Wii. Yeah, I had friends that the Wii was their way that they watched Netflix stuff for years. They didn't really care about the HD thing, you know. It's kind of interesting. And the PS3 was really Sony's attempt to be like, this is the center of your digital life, because the PS3 was a Blu-ray player back when Blu-rays were still really new. Weird to think about that the Blu-ray is approaching 20 years old.
Oh, I feel old.
And in the year 2000, most people still didn't have DVD players. Because I think of the DVD as like, well, yeah, that's like this long-running standard. It's like, it wasn't even around that long before it got replaced with Blu-ray. It had like a 7-year run.
When was the last time you bought a VHS tape? Like, not as a novelty, like to watch.
Probably in 1999. I don't think I bought one since I had DVDs.
Yeah, I think it was around the same time for me. Getting back to something else topical, I think it was buying those 2 tapes of the Freezer Saga. Between the time when Toonami, during Toonami's long hiatus when they kept everybody waiting for the conclusion.
Yeah,
and then like those 2 tapes, like 6 episodes popped up. Yeah, I got ordered them through Suncoast.
Yeah, we used to buy anime tapes, and it was so expensive. It was so expensive to like buy anime back in the 90s because you had to buy it on VHS. VHSs were way more expensive to make than DVDs. DVDs were just so cheap to make. So the price really started to come down with DVDs, but like with VHSs, they were very expensive to make. So if you wanted to buy any kind of thing that was a series, you were buying multiple VHSs. I remember, a whole shelf of the series, and each tape was $24.99. You'd be spending hundreds of dollars to buy a series.
Yeah, if you wanted to collect an entire series in the VHS days, that was the labor of like a couple of years. You get excited like, oh man, I got volume 6. Only 5 more to go.
Yep.
There was no such thing as binge watching.
Yeah.
And that's new.
And you didn't know what they had till you went down there and looked at it. And you're like, oh, there's this. I always wanted to watch that. Or that looks cool. Maybe I'll buy that. And you and your friend, like me and my friends one person would buy it, and then we'd copy it and make copies of it. Because that was the only way you could do it. I still made copies of VHSs after DVDs were a thing. Because It was expensive. It was like blank tapes were still not that expensive. So that was one of the ways that we would just feed the DVD player into the VHS machine and record it. You know?
Yep.
So it was kind of interesting. I think, yeah, the last console generation that had those wacky accessories was the Wii generation, because the PS3 had a bunch too. And I found out about some that were really bizarre, like the Wonder Book. This was a Harry Potter tie-in accessory for the PS3. I don't know if anybody's seen the Wonder Book. You can look up some demos on YouTube. It's a really rare thing. I kind of thought about trying to get one off of eBay just as a tchotchke, as like a bauble to play with my kids and with my wife, because it would be this weird time capsule of Harry Potter fandom from like 2009 or 2010 or whenever it came out. But it was like a book, you put it in front of it and there was like a wand, and you had to have the PS3 camera. There was a camera for the PS2 called the iToy. I'm just remembering that.
Yep.
But you had the PS3 camera, and then it would show you on the TV and it would do stuff. It would show like magic happening, right? And that was the game. And they came out with like 2 or 3 of these Wonder Book games. They were Harry Potter tie-ins. But you wouldn't know they're Harry Potter tie-ins from the title. For whatever reason, they didn't put Harry Potter all over it. And I don't know what they were thinking to not put Harry Potter front and center on every piece of thing that you got, because then people probably would have bought it a lot. Or why they didn't come out with it for the Wii. I don't know. It's a PS3 game, though. You can find it, the Wonder Book. And then the Move controllers.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about the Wonder Swan. Ever hear about that one?
The Wonder Swan. The Coleco. Did Coleco make that? The Wonder Swan?
Or was that an EC? I forget. It was
the
a
Wonder
handheld.
Swan Color was released by Bandai. It was Bandai that did it.
Oh, okay. We were both wrong. Oh, well.
Yeah. The graphics were really good for the Wonder Swan. It was like a handheld console. But it didn't really take off here, it looks like. But yeah, I remember the Wonder Swan. There was also the Neo Geo Pocket. That one was really good.
Yeah, the Wonder Swan was like all the rage in like my friends' circles. Like freshman, sophomore years of college. I don't know why. Just remember the name.
Yeah, it was cool, but I mean, Game Boy Advance. Or there was also the, like I said, the Neo Geo Pocket. Neo Geo Pocket Color? I'm trying to remember what it was called. That was a pretty interesting little handheld system. There was a lot of handheld systems flooding the market in the early 2000s for whatever reason, trying to take a bite of that sweet Nintendo pie. Not that there weren't a lot of handhelds before that. There was like the Atari Lynx and the Game Gear, but there was a bunch. There was like the Game Boy Advance. There was Wonder Swan. There was the Nokia N-Gage. I don't know if anybody remembers the N-Gage. They were supposed to say
Engage,
had to
take the battery out.
Not Engage, but they're like, you have to take it all apart to change games. You have to like take it into pieces. Take the battery out, take the back off with the screwdriver, and then put a game in. Like, I don't know what they were thinking. They're like, but it works as a phone. You know? They think they were just a couple years too early for like the iPhone thing.
Yeah. Oh, I see Matthew Martin bringing up the TurboGrafx 16, which I do think gets criminally short shrift.
Yeah, TurboGrafx 16 was awesome. A PC Engine in Japan.
Made by NEC or Hudson Soft here. Not actually 16-bit, really an 8-bit system. But
I didn't know that. I think they put the 16 in it because everything had to be 16-bit in 1991.
Well, because it has if I remember correctly, the way it was explained to me, its main processor, like its main CPU is 8-bit. Its graphics processor is 16-bit.
Oh, okay. They had some great games for it. I think one of the, it's debatable whether the best Castlevania game is Rondo of Blood, which was for the PC Engine. It's for the PC Engine CD. They had a CD accessory too. That's why
audio.
That's why the music sounds so good on it. But yeah, PC Engine or the TurboGrafx 16. I remember those. It had some cool games. I remember some fighting games. The Neo Geo was always the king, right? Like if you knew someone who had a Neo Geo, they were like the coolest kid in school. because it
Yep,
was
one of
just
my
an.
buddies had one.
It was yeah. I had a friend who had one. It was an arcade board. It was huge, just an arcade
Yeah.
board that like sat on your living room floor. Here's your controller, and it's an arcade controller, and you're like, whoa! And you saw it, the big CRT in the living room. You're like, it's like playing an arcade cabinet. It looked so good. It was such a great looking console. Boy, was it expensive. It's like $450 or something, or maybe $600 if you wanted to get
Oh yeah.
two controllers.
It was more than high end. Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. And the games were huge and super expensive.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically like little arcade boards and like the
The
same thing they put in the cabinets.
Yeah, SNK hadn't originally designed it to be a home console. They had designed an arcade board, and their whole idea of the arcade board was to have interchange. They're like, why don't we take the interchangeable cartridges from these home consoles, and we'll just make arcade boards that do that are just really good, right? Like the CPS system, but we'll have four things. So the whole idea was like, we can ship you an arcade cabinet that has four games in it. And so if you've ever seen, and you can actually hook the SNK arcade cabinets up to your CRT TV if you ever get a hold of the cabinet, or if it's like a wrecked cabinet and the board is still good, you can hook the board up to a TV just like a Neo Geo, and it works as long as you're able to hook the controllers up to it as well. So anyway, it'll look weird, but I've seen people do it, and it has four different slots. So you could order four different games, and it came with like the little paper things that go on the outside. You could change those out to show whatever games were in it. And the whole idea was like, okay, you run a pizza parlor, you have room for two cabinets, you can buy a Neo Geo cabinet and get four games in one cabinet. Isn't that cool? And check it out, it's only $300 extra because you only have to buy three extra games, and each game's $150 or whatever. It's like, so it was a big deal for people who ran pizza parlors. That's where I always saw those cabinets, was pizza parlors, because they only had room for a couple cabinets. Neo Geo let you have four different games. You could have Final Fight and Puzzle Bobble and King of Fighters or something else, and it was great. So Neo Geo was like, well, what if we just take this out? What if we just make it a console? We'll just put the board in like a plastic case and sell it for $600. They did it.
Yeah, I hear those got really huge in South America too.
Yeah, they were very, in South America, they were very like the elite of the elite. It's like the richest people would buy it. What was cool too is they had a card. There was a card reader in the cabinets and in the AES, the Advanced Entertainment System was what it was called, the AES, and you could save your game onto the card and then go play it at the arcade and vice versa. So if you had the game at home, you could, like, whatever it was, it could be what am I thinking of, like Metal Slug, and then you could take your game and take it to the arcade game and like play it there. Really weird, crazy ideas in the 90s, and they somehow pulled them off, but we don't remember them. One of the reasons we don't remember all the gimmicks is that I think it turns out most of the gimmicks just are gimmicks. Like, you don't end up using them that much.
Yeah, a lot of spaghetti thrown at the wall back in the 90s. But it was exciting.
Yeah. Nintendo 64 was originally supposed to have a disc drive that didn't use optical discs. They're like, no. People can copy CDs and stuff. We're not doing that. We're going to use magnetic discs. It's like floppies. Yeah, but like way better than floppies, and also 100 times more expensive. And then they canceled it.
Wonder why.
Yeah.
They just they never should have scuttled that deal
With Sony.
To do the PlayStation. Like, I'm just haunted by the alternate timeline where that happened.
Yeah,
and
I
then
think
the Saturn got the RISC chip.
Yeah, if they were really clever, what they would have done is been like, okay, rather than release this as a CD add-on, we're just gonna make it a new console. It's gonna be the Nintendo CD Mega or something, and then people would have just bought it as the next Nintendo system, and it could have hit the market perfectly in 1994 and everything.
You can find images of unearthed prototypes for the Nintendo PlayStation.
They are out there.
And they have controllers. Yeah, they have controllers that are a weird like hybrid or like an in-between missing link between the SNES controller and the PS1 controller. Because if you look at it, like the DualShock controller is just two Super Nintendo controllers stacked on top of each other with handles and like sticks.
I'm gonna try to show people. Here it is.
Yeah.
This is the Apple Pippin. You've heard of the Newton, but have you heard of the Pippin? I don't know if you have, but here's what the Pippin looked like. So, yes, Apple and Bandai, the makers of the WonderSwan, came out with a home console called the Pippin. I didn't know a single person who bought it. But they exist, and you can buy them. And I don't even know what kind of software they run. And they had this weird controller that had kind of a rocky Genesis-style D-pad and then a mouse ball in the middle for like operating a more computer interface. I guess maybe they had Marathon for it. I guess you could buy Marathon on the Pippin. Marathon 1 and Marathon 2. You could play them on the Apple Pippin. That looks cool. Wouldn't that be cool?
That's like a square Dreamcast controller.
Yeah, it's really weird. Definitely weird. Someone in the chat mentioned 3DO. I had a friend who had a 3DO, and they were definitely cool for the time. That's what Marathon 2 looked like. That's Marathon 2, which I have a lot of memories of playing Marathon 2.
Whoa, yeah, I'd never seen that before.
Yeah, it was really rare. I remember reading about it in like Macworld, and then I never saw one. I never saw it in stores. Let's look at the
Probably
I/O.
A warehouse of them somewhere.
So the back I/O has VGA, and it has S-video and regular video out with a switch.
Ooh.
It has a printer port and a modem port. So you could hook your modem up to it. It's copyright Bandai Digital Entertainment Corp. Mitsubishi Electric.
That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. I like this failure. this thumbnail. Failure. No. It's like I know why it failed. It's like they didn't come out with it, is what I felt like. It's like you never really released it and got people to buy it. I don't ever remember seeing it in a store. I guess it ran a PowerPC. This is kind of interesting. Food for thought, I guess. So the PowerPC is a processor architecture designed by IBM and Motorola. That's why the back of it said Motorola on it, probably. No, or did it say Mitsubishi? I don't know. I think it said Motorola. No, it said Mitsubishi. Anyways, the PowerPC was designed by Motorola and IBM. It's what Apple switched to after the Quadra became the PowerPC. So Power Mac, if you remember Power Macs from the 1990s, that's what these ran on. But they ended up being used in a bunch of consoles. So if my memory serves correctly, there's a PowerPC in the GameCube. So the GameCube runs on a Macintosh processor from around the year 2000. And it has an ATI graphics card. So it has a Macintosh graphics card in it as well, which is weird. What's today AMD. The original Xbox ran on PC architecture, but the Xbox 360 ran a PowerPC. So Microsoft was using basically like the Macintosh architecture for the Xbox 360. And I don't remember why they switched to it, but they did. And not only did they switch to it, they found a way for it to just emulate the old Xbox stuff for certain backwards compatibility purposes. Very weird. And then the PowerPC ended up being used in the Wii and the Wii U. So if you have a Wii U, you have a 3-core PowerPC processor that can run all the architecture technically of the Xbox 360. Like there's probably some way to hack it so that your Wii U could run Xbox 360 games, but no one's ever bothered to do that because that would just be a incredible waste at that point. But all the architecture is the same. That's why it could run Wii games. Wii games could run GameCube games because the architecture was all the same. Nintendo just kind of kept pumping it up over the years and making it bigger and better. It's really funny.
Mother has done it. It's like Everest, right? It's there.
Yeah. Back when Apple was at rock bottom, Apple stock was $12 and something cents.
Ooh.
In 1996. With Gil Amelio. Gil Amelio was the CEO. I'm trying to remember who Steve Jobs brought in the CEO of Pepsi at one point to do the job back in the 80s, and they got Steve Jobs kicked out of his own company. The Steves got kicked out of their company by the CEO of Pepsi, who did not know how to run a computer company, I think.
Seems like. Yeah, the 90s were also a weird time in PCs because then, you had Apple doing this weird Phoenix Act, and then you had the antitrust suits against Microsoft.
Yeah, the antitrust suits were really interesting to look at, and kind of looking back on them now, one of the things I think about it is nobody really had any idea what they were talking about because everything was new, and the people litigating it and talking about it also didn't understand how computers worked or like what software was. So Microsoft did weird things to comply with the antitrust suit, none of which really addressed the problems that people thought existed at Microsoft. It was such a weird thing to go back and look at, I think. Those antitrust suits. And I think you reap the rewards today where you get Apple's able to sue Samsung for $1 billion for having a user interface, which Apple themselves stole their entire OS. A lot of people don't know that Mac OS is a fork of BSD, which is Linux. Stole their whole OS
really?
and then sued people for having a similar interface to them when they in fact stole the GUI from Xerox. They tried to sue Microsoft for Windows itself at one point.
Yeah, wasn't Windows ripped off from Xerox?
Both of them were, right? Xerox designed the first GUI, and Apple had a GUI for the Mac in 1984 and for the Apple II. There was a GUI for the Apple II that's often forgotten. The Apple II was in a lot of ways better than the original Macs, but they pushed the Macintosh because that's the brand they wanted to push. But yeah, they were both basically ripped off from Xerox. So it's kind of weird for Apple to sue Samsung. We're like, they used Android OS, which you didn't even make. You forked Android OS and have people touch a phone with their finger. Give us $1 billion. So they gave him $1 billion in pennies. And they're like, oh, meanwhile, we could still keep ordering phone screens from you, right? Because you make all the phone screens. And Samsung's like, yeah, we'll keep selling you phone screens. When you use an Apple phone, you're using a Samsung phone screen. I think still. What a weird time.
All the 80s what all the cyberpunk dystopia writers missed, or the guy right was, yes, the future will be ruled by heartless international megacorps. What they got wrong is that they will not be like sleek, inefficient, and brutally well informed. They'll be stupid. They'll just be really, really dumb and weird.
Yeah, there'll be these crazy behemoths. Anyway, Brian, I'm starting to run out of time here, so let me go ahead and I think I linked at least your website earlier. You can hop onto Brian's website, read his latest article on malls, but also join his Patreon from there, I believe. Yeah, there's a link to your Patreon. And
And
you
I have
can.
an announcement pursuant to that.
Okay, go ahead. I'll bring up
Yeah.
stuff.
So tonight was kind of the warm up for my first ever author live reading stream. That's right, tomorrow night over on the Geek Gab channel. I'm going to be doing a private stream for my backers and my new patrons only of the Burn Book Chapter 1, read live by me. If you didn't back the book, you still have a chance to get an invite to the live author reading by signing up at the appropriate tier through my Patreon or Subscribe Star. And that is Count and higher tiers get access to that, because I'm combining it with my monthly AMA. So yes. So you've got one more day. Get in on it.
All right. Okay. That's a cool idea. I hadn't thought about doing that. Someone mentioned doing that in a comment to a video, another video.
It might have been the same guy, because it was Bayou Bomber who suggested I do it. And I know he watches you too. Idea.
All right. Okay, guys. I think that's going to be it. Anything else, Brian, before we go?
Just want to say thanks again for having me on. Fantastic discussion. We really chin wide out.
All right.
We just nostalgia all over the place. So thanks to you and your viewers.
I need to see if I can make the scan lines even bigger. We'll make bigger scan lines. Check
Yes.
this out.
Yes.
There you go. Bigger scan lines. They're big now. Anyway. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And hop onto Brian's mailing list. It'll be over at brianniemeyer.com. And check out his Patreon as well. Of course, if you join mine, I do like a free book every month. And you'll get free copies of all the stuff I do for the live rights, which we're doing revision now. So if you join now, you get all of those other posts pre-revision. And then we'll talk about how to publish this stuff. So all that will be happening live on the channel. That's my response to the AI business is let's go ahead and let's do it live. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, guys, I'll see you all next time. Have a great one. And thank you for joining me, Brian. I appreciate it.